everyone. This is update for August 16, 2023, day 539 of the war, end of the date update. Also catch up for August 15. As always, I'm gonna do quick strategic update, and then I'm gonna switch to the situation in Ukraine on the battlefield. So today I'm just gonna narrowly focus on the military topics. So first, Latvia is recalling all of its border guard troops from their vacations and calling them to Belarus-Latvia border. Essentially, that means there is a crisis there. There is also a meeting that's going to happen between Poland, Lithuania, and Latvia to completely block Belarus border. So essentially, nobody can cross, in either direction. So that's really effectively we're seeing new Iron Curtain being built. Then next topic is switch to Russia. I spoke about the Russian ruble that was close to free fall, so it was stopped. And the way it was stopped is essentially, and actually it gained some strength. It strengthened to 95 rubles per $1. Just a reminder, it went as low as 102. And the way it was done is effectively forcing Russian exporters to sell their revenue, their US dollars or dollars or euros that they get for the sale of mostly crude oil at this point. It's effectively, it's a measure of a communism, right? Because it forces private companies to sell FX to help situation in the country. What this really means is essentially expropriation of the part of the value that exporter generated because they forced to sell, and then because Russian government is financing this war through issuing more and more debt, you basically getting devalued Russian ruble, which will be slowly sliding down. So effectively, this is extraction of value, expropriation of some value from these exporters. It can still continue for some time. It doesn't mean that it's going to destroy them. They can continue this for many more years. It's definitely undermining them. What this really means is that most of the expansion capex will be cut, slashed. So essentially, there won't be any growth, and basically, it's stagnation and slow decline. It's basically, subjecting all of these exporters to death by thousand cuts. But that's, when you're desperate and it's about your survival, and by that I mean survival of the Russian bureaucratic apparatus. They don't care. All that matters is, okay, we need to survive for this year, and this measure may work for some time. Once this measure will sort of run its course, there will be more sort of drastic measures. But essentially, what this all means is the situation in Russia is getting worse and worse by day. But in comparison, situation in Ukraine gets worse much faster. In the war and in generally, the relative speed, that's what matters, right? Not the absolute outcome, but relative speed. And unfortunately, Ukraine is getting towards dead end at much faster rate than Russia. And the sign of that is actually Ukraine is heading towards some form of total mobilization. There is, first of all, Ukrainian political tops, Ukrainian president and his right and left hands came out and started talking about need for war effort. Ukrainian president even went to the front line where he was decorating soldiers, all typical propaganda machine. At the same time, obviously, problems are not being solved. So this is all just optical effect that's being sort of sent to the Ukrainian citizens to diffuse negative energy that starts to build up, and the Ukrainian political top is acutely sensing that things there is a huge dissatisfaction growing in Ukraine with how everything done, how everything is managed. I spoke many times about the rampant corruption. It hasn't changed. That remains. All of that remains. Things don't change, and it's slowly starting to sink into many people who are able to think critically in Ukraine that the way it goes, it's a path to complete destruction, annihilation, and loss in this war. Because loss in this war will mean for you defeat in this war means that Russia will occupy Ukraine, and there will be basically ethnic cleansing. Once that happens, it's not just some kind of peaceful, nice occupation. There will be absolutely cleansing after the territory is basically captured by Russian forces. And so again, this really goes back to what I said before, that Ukraine is on its own way to 1917 moment. And sometimes it looks that Russia is coming there sooner, sometimes Ukraine, and I would say now I'm leaning towards that Ukraine is coming there sooner. And in conceptually, my logic behind this is that Ukraine is smaller, has fewer resources, and these resources are being used in extremely wasteful way, and the same way that Russia does. Except Ukraine is four times smaller, and for that reason, Ukraine cannot afford to be wasteful, while Russia can afford to be wasteful, and that's partially a reason why Russia is so wasteful, is because it has so many resources that it doesn't. There's no competitive pressure to change, to improve itself, and so that's sort of in a way natural. Outcome of that situation. Then going back to Russia is actually it's more China. Chinese Minister of Defense is visiting Russia. I think he's there for like 4 or 5 days. He visited obviously Russian Minister of Defense. Then there is military fair. He's there. He's also going to Belarus. At the same time, Russian president sent very nice letter to the president of North Korea. So as you can see, this relationship between Belarus, Russia, North Korea, and China, it's getting stronger by day. And the logic that sometimes sort of I hear in the West about appeasing Russia by basically throwing part of Ukraine into Russia's hand, and then somehow it will change, and the relationship between Russia and China will somehow disappear, is completely false, because it's in a way like shark smells blood and it will continue attacking. So this is the same logic here. Then another thing that's happening in Ukraine, Russia continues its attacks against Ukrainian port infrastructure on the Black Sea and the Danube River, which is obviously basically the Danube River Delta, which is essentially another way to get into Black Sea. There was significant damage done yesterday, about the night. So Ukraine is basically becoming more and more bottlenecked in terms of its export, because with every iteration of the attack, the port infrastructure is more and more damaged. So and I just want to explain, Russia intentionally does not attack these cargo ships that get into Ukrainian ports, because they are under the flags, obviously not Ukraine, but all various countries around the world. So they don't want to have any sort of negative repercussions in terms of foreign affairs for themselves. So they figured out that the best way is actually simply destroy port infrastructure that will create more permanent damage, permanently disable Ukraine's export, and that's the more efficient and effective way to basically undermine Ukraine and Ukraine's ability to self-defend. And so far, they obviously successful. Ukraine is not responding with the like attacks against Russian cargo ships, and Russia is being able to export part of it agricultural and fertilizer export and so on, and crude oil as well. Um, and by the way, Russia, it looks like it's going to have a bumper um, grain harvest, grain crop this year. So there will be plenty to export out of Russia. Now I'm gonna. Oh, and one other thing in terms of actually military equipment development and how quickly Russia responds, despite being very bureaucratic country, and maybe it's not a perfect response, but nevertheless. So you probably see this attacks by kamikaze drones against tanks, basically any all kind of like armored vehicles, and sometimes also just infantry and so on. And Russian industry developed basically radio electronic devices to suppress communication between this kamikaze drones and obviously the pilot. So far, it's not that great. It only suppresses the four frequencies that the most successful, sorry, not the most widely used frequencies. And you can always sort of switch to different frequency and so on. But it's just the first step, and the more important is the reaction. The move forward. Eventually, they will figure out how to do it much more effective. Uh, Ukraine doesn't even have anything. There is not even rumor of anything being done, and so on. So this is obviously something that private citizens won't be able to do really, because it's basically everything is prohibited in Ukraine by law, and Ukrainian government doesn't do anything. So again, because of the rampant corruption, and focus on something else rather than defending Ukraine. And so this is just gives you a small example of the magnitude of the problems that Ukraine faces. Now let's. I'm going to walk through the front line, starting from the north and going down in a clockwise fashion. The situation along the state border remains more or less the same. No essential changes. Now let's move to the North Lugansk front line. Things here are somewhat stable, quiet in the most of it. The only place where Russian command continuing pressure is a little bit kind of like north here, northeast of Kupiansk. Again, this is not a major offensive. This is just the pressure, intentional pressure to pull reserves of Ukrainian reserves from other areas. And to extent this move has been successful, looks like Ukrainian command is bringing some reserves to this area. But again, there's nothing major in terms of any kind of breakthrough in the front line or anything. Nothing of that nature is happening here. Now let's move to North Donbass front line. So the northern section is quiet, and by quiet I mean it's not truly quiet. It's what is in sort of quotes. This means just skirmishes, exchange of artillery fire, and so on, but nothing of even sort of worth mentioning kind of type of scale. The only place where there's still some activity is there is still a fight for this Klishivka ongoing. Uh, Basically, both sides are still trying to sort of keep, Russian side tries to regain control of Klishivka. Ukrainian side is trying to basically liberate the village, and basically so far it's kind of like status quo remains. There's also Russian pressure attacks north of Bakhmut, with attempts to regain lost ground that when Ukrainian forces tried to pressure north of Bakhmut. Now let's move to the central Donbass front line. Since here are back to their sort of normal, where Russian troops attacking around the Avdiivka salient, and then the other place is Marinka. But as always, they all futile and don't lead to anything so far. Now let's move to Zaporizhya front line. So as I mentioned before, Ukrainian forces managed to liberate this Robotyne village. At this point, they are attacking a village called Zavitne Bajanya, which is a tiny village straight north of this Staromlinivka. So again, this is, as you can see, okay, this village was liberated and nothing essentially happened. Nothing of strategic significance, not even truly tactically anything important happened. And then there's another village where it's going to be a painful squeeze, a lot of losses for tiny village that again, once that village is liberated, then you have Staromlinivka. So, and then only Russian main line of defense. So again, as you can see, with this approach, strategically, this goes to nowhere, and Ukraine cannot simply afford this approach. And then Ukrainian forces are attacking around Robotyne. It's partially liberated, partially it's a gray zone, so it's just kind of like work in progress. It's not done yet. But probably it's going to happen in a day two. Maybe if I'm wrong, it will take longer. But essentially, once Ukrainian forces liberate Robotyne, again, this doesn't lead to anything, right? Then there is another village, another sort of Russian stronghold that needs to be taken, and the price is simply way too high to be successful in the long run strategically. So strategically, it's a dead end. At the same time, Ukrainian command put to work. It looks like this 82nd Airborne Brigade, which is actually now somewhere around here. It has Challenger 2 tanks. They have not been used so far. As I said before, I think Challenger 2 are the best tanks that Ukraine got out of everything it got. I think Leopard 2 has been proven to be, I would say, mediocre tank on its own. There is nothing special, and it was unfortunately just propaganda hype that unfortunately created unreasonable expectation, and when they deflated, there is quite a bit of sort of blowback that happens out of it, and that's why propaganda is always actually poison, and actually that in I would argue that this is actually destructive activities against the country itself, not actually the enemy. Now let's move to the situation along the Dnipro River. Things here are somewhat quiet. Apparently, both sides are regrouping, preparing for next moves. So for now, there's no new updates on this section of the front line. Uh, I forgot one more strategic general update is now um, Russian like top politician is now saying that Russia is gonna attack Ukraine. There'll be major offensive. Sorry, I mean by that major offensive or I would say counter-offensive in response to, I would say, to this Ukrainian offensive that really wasn't really offensive. Um, I think this is more of the sort of cheap talk than anything. Russia simply does not have resources to do it at this point, and whatever relatively small reserves it has, it tries to use it. It will be the same result what Ukraine has right now, and basically they will simply burn them out. So I don't think that it's happening, and even if it does happen, it's actually not a bad outcome for Ukraine because that's really easy, like the best way to destroy a significant number of Russian resources. Um, but Russia is also, as I said before, is quickly approaching situation that they need to do significant mobilization. Said before, it's going to be at minimum 300, 400,000 people. Could be as high as 1 million, could be even higher. It's unclear yet. But basically, both sides are heading towards some kind of like major mobilization effort sometime in the fall, might be earlier. Um, that's all for today. Thanks for watching. Until next time. Bye bye.